disrespect right now for our team has been pretty unbelievable. So it's disappointing. Minus 31 free throw discrepancy. And I might be able to understand it if we were just chucking threes, but we're not.
The frustration had been building for days, but when Stephanie White stepped in front of the cameras after Game 3, the dam finally broke. Her voice wasn't calm, it wasn't polished, it wasn't the usual coach speak we're used to hearing after a tough loss.
But we also can't allow that to consume us, right? Like, we've got to be able to play through that.
I mean, offense is about rhythm, it's about timing, it's about spacing. We allowed them to do that, and they kept us from doing it.
It was raw, it was personal, and it was the sound of someone who had watched her team fight like warriors, only to see their efforts stolen by whistles. She said it plain. A 31 free throw discrepancy. 31. That's not just a bad night. That's not just a tough whistle. That's the kind of number that makes you wonder if you're even watching a real game anymore. White tried to stay measured, but the frustration spilled over as she described the blatant disrespect her team had faced. The message was unmistakable. This wasn't basketball. It was something uglier. And that's really the heart of the story. Because this series between the Indiana Fever and the Las Vegas Aces wasn't about which team could adjust better or who had the hotter hand. No, this was something else. This was a spectacle that felt less like sport and more like a courtroom trial, with the referees playing judge, jury, and executioner. Fans didn't need slow-motion replays or stat breakdowns to know what was going on. They could see it with their own eyes. Indiana shocked everyone in Game 1, going into Vegas and stealing a win on the defending champs' home floor. It was the kind of upset that electrifies a league. But the minute the Aces looked vulnerable, the whistle suddenly became their best player. Game 2 didn't just feel like basketball, it felt like a script. Indiana's physical defense, their body-up toughness, the very identity that got them here. It all magically turned into foul trouble the moment the Aces needed breathing room. Elbows from Vegas? Play on. A Fever player so much as brushed a shoulder? Whistle. Fans could feel it, and players could feel it even more. Offense is built on rhythm, timing, spacing, confidence. But when the whistle interrupts every drive, every possession, rhythm dies. And that's what Indiana kept facing. Every time they tried to get up and down the court, they were dragged back to the free throw line to watch Vegas shoot. How can you build momentum when the game is stopped every 10 seconds? By the time Game 3 rolled around, the bias didn't just feel like bad officiating. It felt like a wall that Indiana could never scale. The sequence that broke the dam came in the third quarter. Aaliyah Boston, the anchor of the Fever, got whistled for a foul on Jackie Young. Stephanie White immediately motioned for a challenge. The bench was ready. The crowd was on its feet. Everyone knew the next few seconds mattered. And then the officials simply ignored it. They acted as if nothing had happened. Seconds later, Chelsea Gray buried a three-pointer, flipping momentum, and in that moment, everything changed. Indiana's lead didn't disappear because Vegas out-executed them. It vanished because the refs refused to even acknowledge a request for review. Inside Gainbridge, the reaction was thunderous. Cheers twisted into boos, and fury echoed through the building. Online, clips of that moment exploded within minutes. Fans weren't debating strategy anymore. They were calling it what it looked like, rigged. And that wasn't the only moment. Fans began posting breakdowns, pointing out sequence after sequence where the calls weren't just questionable, they were insulting. Aaliyah Boston getting hammered in the paint, no whistle, a Fever player barely making contact, instant foul, Asia Wilson lowering her shoulder like a fullback, knocking defenders off balance, play on. Indiana defenders getting tossed to the hardwood, silence. But if a Fever player even breathed on an Aces jersey, you could count on a whistle. It didn't feel like oversight anymore, it felt like an agenda. And that's when the anger shifted from grumbling in the stands to a full-blown eruption across social media. Clips were dissected, slowed down, analyzed, all pointing to the same conclusion. Vegas wasn't winning these games. They were being carried. But here's where Indiana showed something special, because lesser teams would have folded. Most squads facing that kind of wall would have dropped their heads and muttered about unfairness until the final buzzer. Not the Fever. They kept grinding. And the face of that defiance was Lexi Hull. Think about this for a moment. A player battling a painful back injury, listed as questionable before every game, moving stiff in warm-ups, and clearly not anywhere close to 100%. She wasn't even supposed to be a factor. Yet she stepped onto the floor and gave the performance of her life. 16 points, 10 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 blocks, a steal. and the clutch triples that kept Indiana alive every time Vegas tried to pull away. Hull tied a franchise playoff record with 8 threes across 2 games, and she did it all while grimacing through pain. She dove for loose balls, fought for rebounds against players bigger and stronger, and kept the crowd alive with her effort. Gainbridge saw it. They knew they were watching a warrior put her body on the line for her team. Every shot she hit was more than points. It was oxygen. And that's the cruel irony. On the very night Hull played the best basketball of her career, the conversation wasn't about her. It wasn't about her heart, her hustle, or her courage. It was about the officials. It was about phantom whistles and momentum stolen. Her night should have been celebrated, but instead it became a footnote in a controversy that overshadowed everything else, and maybe that's the perfect metaphor for Indiana. Underdogs who fight with grit and sacrifice, only to be shoved aside by forces outside their control. On the other side, you had A'ja Wilson, the so-called MVP, the player who's been celebrated as the league's brightest star. And what did she deliver in Game 3? Nearly 3 quarters without a single basket. She started with a confident 3 that looked like it might signal dominance, but that was her lone highlight for the entire first half. By the break, she was 1 for 11. Let that sink in. 1 make on 11 attempts. That's not just an off night. That's dreadful. By the end, she limped to 13 points on 20 shots. That's not an MVP. That's not leadership. That's inefficiency at its worst. But here's the kicker. Even with Wilson bricking everything in sight, Vegas still walked away with the win. Why? Because every whistle bailed them out. Every momentum swing came with free throws. Every Indiana rally was chopped down before it could grow. Fans weren't blind. They knew Wilson didn't carry her team that night. The refs did, and yet the media spin told a different story. Headlines praised Wilson's all-around game. Analysts pointed to rebounds and blocks, dressing up a stat line that was embarrassing on its face. Others quickly pivoted to praising the Aces' depth, highlighting Jackie Young's 25 points or Chelsea Gray's steady hand. What they didn't do was give credit where it belonged to Aaliyah Boston, who executed a defensive masterpiece. Possession after possession, she walled off the paint, denied Wilson her spots, and forced her into uncomfortable, low-percentage shots. That's why Wilson struggled. That's why her efficiency tanked. But instead of giving Boston the praise she earned, the narrative bent over backward to protect the Aces brand. And that's the part that enraged fans the most. Because this wasn't just about one bad call or one rough night. This was about a pattern. This was about a league that seems more interested in propping up its stars than protecting its integrity. Becky Hammon even had the audacity to complain after the game that Wilson only shot 1 free throw in 38 minutes. Think about that. Her team had been living at the foul line all series, feasting on freebies, and still she wanted more. When you're drowning in free throws, crying for more whistles isn't just tone deaf, it's insulting, and fans saw right through it. That's why Stephanie White's explosion matters. She wasn't just venting, she wasn't just emotional after a loss, she was putting the league on notice. Her demand for a full-scale investigation into officiating wasn't about one series, it was about the future of the WNBA itself. Because here's the truth. Without the surge of new fans, without Caitlin Clark drawing millions of eyeballs, without the Fever's improbable rise, the league wouldn't even have this spotlight. And yet, instead of protecting that growth, instead of ensuring fairness, the league sat silent while referees handed lifelines to the defending champs. Fans know it. Social media knows it. Analysts know it. The only ones pretending otherwise are in the league office, hoping the outrage dies down. But thanks to Stephanie White, it won't. Her call for accountability has already forced the conversation back to where it belongs. Officiating isn't just inconsistent, it's compromising the game's integrity. And if the league ignores it, the message to fans will be loud and clear: fairness doesn't matter, protecting favorites does. That's the reality hanging over this series. Indiana fought. They clawed. They played with heart and resilience that should have been the story. Instead, they were robbed of their stage. And the league has a choice now: clean up the mess or watch the trust they've built with fans crumble. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't about a few bad whistles. This was about credibility. This was about a team giving everything, only to have their sweat and sacrifice overshadowed by an officiating circus. And if the WNBA wants to keep this wave of new fans, it has to answer one simple question. What's the point of talent, hustle, and heart if the whistle decides the winner? The deeper you dig into this series, the harder it becomes to see it as just basketball. It feels like a case study in how a sport can lose credibility right in front of everyone's eyes. Fans aren't just upset about missed calls, they're angry because they can sense when the scale is tilted. And once fans feel like outcomes aren't earned, the magic of sports disappears. That's the line the WNBA is playing with right now. If they don't step in, they risk teaching their audience that effort doesn't matter, defense doesn't matter, clutch plays don't matter, only the whistle matters. And who wants to watch that? What's made this all the more striking is how obvious the imbalance has been. We've seen leagues survive questionable calls before. The NFL has its share of blown pass interferences. The NBA has lived through decades of conspiracy whispers, especially after the Tim Donaghy scandal. But even in those cases, the controversies were scattered moments, individual games that sparked debate. What's happening here feels different. This is a playoff series where the imbalance hasn't just been present, it's been decisive. 31 more free throws for Vegas? That's not noise in the data. That's the headline. And fans didn't need to squint to see it. They felt it every time the Fever clawed their way into a lead, only for the whistle to halt the game and hand momentum back to Vegas. Every time Aaliyah Boston fought for post position and got called for a phantom foul. Every time Lexi Hall hustled for a 50-50 ball and got punished while an Aces player could bulldoze through untouched. It wasn't subtle. It was screaming at them. That's why social media lit up like wildfire. The clips didn't just trend in Indiana, they spread nationally. Suddenly, people who barely watched the WNBA were tuning in, not for the basketball, but for the controversy. And that's not the kind of attention the league should want. But let's not forget the human side of this. Think about the players who are pouring everything into this. Lexi Hall wasn't just playing basketball, she was sacrificing her health, pushing through visible pain, grimacing on the sidelines, and still delivering the kind of performance that legends are built on. 16 points in the playoffs, while guarding stars, boxing out bigger players, and giving her body up for rebounds. That's the stuff coaches dream of, and fans never forget. Or Aaliyah Boston, who has carried the weight of being the Fever's anchor from the day she entered the league. She spent this series battling triple teams, getting hacked on every possession, and still holding A'ja Wilson to one of the ugliest shooting nights of her career. And yet, instead of being rewarded with recognition, instead of being celebrated for their resilience, they walked away with nothing. Because the storyline wasn't their effort. It was the officiating circus. Stephanie White knew that. That's why her post-game comments mattered so much. She wasn't just venting about one game. She was standing up for her players, for their fight, for their credibility. Coaches rarely speak out like that in the WNBA. They know fines are waiting. They know the league prefers silence. But White reached a breaking point. She looked at the box score, saw the -31 free throw gap, and knew she couldn't let it slide. Because if she stayed quiet, the message to her players would have been even worse. Keep working, keep fighting, but don't expect fairness. And no coach worth their salt can send that message. Her words weren't carefully crafted PR lines, they were raw emotion. They were the kind of truth that doesn't usually make it past the post-game podium. And that's why they resonated. Fans latched onto her frustration because it mirrored their own. Social media turned her quotes into rallying cries. This isn't basketball. This is a heist. That line spread like wildfire because it didn't just describe the Fever's pain, it described what everyone was seeing. A playoff series that felt stolen. And when fans start throwing around words like rigged and heist, the league has a serious problem. Because that kind of language doesn't just disappear after the next round. It sticks. It becomes part of the conversation around the sport. Think about boxing and how its credibility was eroded over decades of questionable decisions. Think about professional wrestling, which embraced the lack of fairness and leaned into being scripted entertainment. The WNBA cannot afford to flirt with that perception. Not now. Not when it's finally breaking into mainstream conversation. The Fever and Caitlin Clark have pulled more eyes onto this league than ever before. The opportunity is massive, but if those new fans think outcomes are manipulated, they'll leave just as fast as they arrived. And the real sting? It's not like Vegas needed the help. The Aces are a powerhouse. They're the defending champions for a reason. Jackie Young showed exactly why in Game 3 with her 25-point masterclass. Chelsea Gray, Calm as ever, chipped in big shots and veteran poise, the depth of that roster is real. But instead of their talent being the story, it's the officiating. The spotlight should have been on Young's daggers or on Gray bailing out possessions. Instead, the conversation is about referees refusing challenges and phantom fouls. That robs everyone. The Fever, the Aces, and the fans. The strangest part is how the national media played it safe. Instead of tackling the controversy head-on, many outlets softened their language, focusing on Vegas's resilience or Wilson's all-around impact. Some even framed the Fever as inexperienced and prone to mistakes, completely ignoring how many of those mistakes were manufactured by whistles. And when they did mention officiating, it was in passing, as if it were a minor subplot. Fans saw that and felt insulted. They knew the truth was being watered down to protect the league's image, and nothing fuels outrage more than feeling like you're being gaslit. But no amount of spin can erase the reality. The video clips are out there. Fans are rewatching plays, pointing to elbows, flops, and phantom calls. The evidence is too visible to bury. And that's why Stephanie White's demand for an investigation can't just fade into the background. Because if the league ignores it, they're not just ignoring a coach. They're ignoring every fan who saw the same thing. They're ignoring the players who put their bodies on the line. They're ignoring the very integrity of their product. Let's zoom out for a second. This season was supposed to be a celebration of growth. Caitlin Clark brought in record-breaking ratings, arenas were selling out, merchandise was flying off the shelves. For the first time, it felt like the WNBA wasn't just fighting for attention, it had it. And the Fever were at the center of that story. The last thing the league should want is for those new fans to walk away convinced the games aren't fair. Yet that's exactly what this series is risking. If fans walk away believing Vegas is being protected, believing stars like Wilson will always get bailed out, then what's left? Why invest in a league that feels scripted? That's why White's explosion is so important. It's not just about protecting her team, it's about protecting the league from itself. The WNBA has a choice: confront the officiating problem openly, or keep hiding behind PR statements and hope fans forget. But fans won't forget. Not when the evidence is this clear. Not when the games feel this compromised. Every time a whistle blows in the next round, people will wonder, is this real? Or is this another script? For the Fever, this will go down as one of the most painful playoff runs in recent memory. They fought through injuries, they fought through doubt, they fought through every obstacle. And yet, when history looks back, the conversation won't be about their heart. It won't be about Lexi Hull's grit or Aliyah Boston's defense. It will be about the officiating scandal that stole the spotlight. That's unfair to them. That's unfair to the fans, and it's unfair to the league itself. But maybe, just maybe, this controversy can be a turning point. Maybe Stephanie White's words will be the spark that forces the WNBA to look in the mirror. Because if this continues, if fairness keeps being compromised, the league risks undoing everything it's worked so hard to build. Growth means nothing if fans don't trust what they're watching. And right now, that trust is hanging by a thread. So here's the bottom line. Indiana earned better. The fans deserved better. And the WNBA has to decide if it values credibility more than protecting its favorites. Stephanie White drew a line in the sand. Now the league has to answer. Because this wasn't just a tough loss, it was a warning shot. And if nothing changes, fans will remember. They always do.